Hello and welcome to the Fertility Alliance Book Club. This is actually the fourth book club that we've had, and we're really delighted that this evening we've got with us Yvonne John, who is the author of Dreaming of the Life Unlived, Intimate Stories and Portraits of Women Without Children, which is a great book. If anyone hasn't read it yet, I would recommend that you do get it and read it straight away. But Yvonne, thank you so much for joining us for the book club this evening.
Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here.
Well, it's lovely to have you and to have you discussing your book. I might just jump straight in actually. And one of the things that I wanted to start by asking you was that, the book begins with your own chapter at the start. And one of the things that you mention is that when you're trying to get pregnant, you say you didn't tell anyone about having fertility issues because you didn't really want to let the world into that part of your life, which was obviously very personal to you. And I wondered how hard it was for you to go from that to deciding to write this book and open yourself up, not just to your kind of family and friends, but to the whole world.
Oh, it was incredibly hard. I mean, just the journey itself. I think I remember because I got married at 39 and at 40 decided that I wanted to try to have children. And at 43 was kind of propelled me into that whole infertility side of my story. And one of the things I remember was that I didn't, and myself and my husband at the time didn't tell anyone because you don't want people continually asking you what's happening. Because of our age, I found out afterwards that people were assuming that we didn't want children, um, because we had left it so late. And I found that quite painful as well because it also put us into this camp that people didn't care about it anymore. So we had, that side of it. We had the side that we were hiding, and therefore found it very isolating to be on that journey. And then when you get to the place when we got to that place where, I was never told I couldn't have children, but I just knew in my heart when I got the unexplained infertility diagnosis that I wouldn't become a mum. I was 43, 2 months away from 44 at the time. I knew in my heart that I wouldn't become a mum. And that then became this very confusing time. And I remember going home just flat out on my bed crying. And I remember then it almost felt like the next day, but it could have been a week later. But it just felt like immediately afterwards, I couldn't be around anyone with their children. So hearing the words I'm pregnant, being around my friends with their young kids, going to family events, all suddenly became very painful. And I didn't understand that I was grieving. So, because I didn't understand it and I didn't have a language to describe what I was going through, I found that then I couldn't say it to anyone else. I couldn't explain it to anyone else. And that then became another part of my silence and experience because I was on my own. I had, as I said, I had no language, I had no understanding, I didn't know what it meant for me. So I couldn't say to people, this is what I'm going through. So it's such a leap, and I know we'll come on to the middle part of this story from being there and then writing my book, because writing my book did give me a voice to kind of explain it. And there was a lot of things that happened in between. As I said, we'll come back onto. However, it was hard to be at the beginning of it, and it was then hard to be in this place where I'm now going to expose everything I've been through to then let the world see it and for the world to potentially judge me for what had happened in my past, which I myself was judging myself for. So yeah, it's not an easy journey to be here, let alone I think it's one thing when you're on that journey and you can keep it quiet and just tell a few people, but it's a whole nother ball game when you decide you're going to tell the world.
And it wasn't only your story, but a lot of other women's stories as well. How did you find them all?
So at the beginning of my grief journey, and I was fortunate, I had a friend who named it as grief, although I was resistant to hearing that. She knew Jodie Day, and she said to me, "You need to speak to Jodie Day." Now, Jodie Day was founder of Gateway Women website, which is a organisation supporting women who are childless by circumstance. So I made contact. I did a living without work children workshop. It was a one-day workshop at the time in October 2014. That was in December. And because, and then during that workshop, I realized I really needed to understand my grief. She was then running a Plan B mentorship program, which was a year-long program to support women working through the grief of being childless and not becoming a mum. So I joined that program in 2015. And during that time, I um, was coming to terms, let's say, with what I was experiencing. Again, it wasn't easy. Just because you enter that room, it doesn't mean you want to be there, and it doesn't mean that you're going to find it easy to face the grief and everything that comes up around it. However, what I did find was a place of understanding and acceptance, which I found hard to give to myself. During the journey, I can't remember, we might have been about halfway through it. I remember listening to all the ladies' stories, and something in me, I sat there and thought, well, hang on a minute, none of us are being listened to, because there was a lot of fix it stories. Everybody basically had their version of somebody trying to fix them. And therefore, recognizing how hard it is for us to say we don't have children. And I remember just jumping up saying, you know what, I'm going to write a book about this because, we just need to be listened to. We need to be heard. And everyone went, and then I instantly thought, what am I doing? Because I have no idea how I'm going to write a book. And through going to women networking events in my local area, I remember being on a table with, I think it was about 6 other women. And during that time, we had to do an icebreaker. So we had to go around the table, and every woman had to introduce themselves and just, I think it was like, say one interesting fact about yourself. I can't remember, something around those lines. And I was the last to speak. And I remember every woman saying, they introduced themselves and they said, I'm a mother of one, mother of whatever, grandmother of whatever. And it was like, I remember listening to every one of them. And I thought, hang on a minute, I've done loads of traveling. I think I've done loads of traveling. I've done this, I've done that, I've done that. I've done some amazing things. But in that moment, I felt like it didn't matter, and I had no value, because I wasn't a mum. And I just sat there and thought, well, what am I going to say? Because I couldn't say I am a mum. And I remember reflecting on it as a group afterwards. And I was telling the room of women this experience that I had. And I said, but it's okay, I'm going to write a book about it. And then they all cheered. And I sat there and thought, why am I saying this? I have no idea what I'm doing. And I was very fortunate that Helen Tucker, who was one of the ladies running the session, she does a lot of coaching around women and empowering women. And she came up to me afterwards and said, you know what, Yvonne, this is really important. I'm going to help you get this book out. And from there, she coached me. And I went back to the group because one of the first question she asked me was, how many women have you got? And I'm like, none. And she was like, well, how many could you get? I don't know. So I went back to my gateway group, and most of them agreed to take part in it. And I had some other friends as well that I knew who had experienced the loss of motherhood. And I asked them if they'd like to be a part of the book, and they also said yes. So that's how it all started to come together. I was just amazed at how how they all embraced it. I mean, we're talking about women who never talked about their stories, barely would tell people that they didn't have children because of the reactions they would get. And they were all then willing to share their stories with the world. And it felt like because it really felt like a sacred privilege also to have them on board, because it was like I was holding their babies in my hand, and I needed to hold it with care as well as the book, started to unfold.
I wanted to ask you that because the stories are all very different, but the thing that really leaps out about them is that they're all incredibly honest. And I wondered how you managed to build up that trust for people to feel they could be so honest with you.
I think it really helped that we knew each other anyway. For the women on the Plan B mentorship program, we were going through this journey together. So we started it, and we were at a point where we were, really leaning on each other for support and care. And then for my friends outside, we had known each other for years. So for them who weren't going through the support in the same way that my Plan B sisters were, um, they, I think they felt that they could trust this whole process because they really felt how valuable the whole book was, and the idea of it. And Helen also put on a writing workshop for us. So she got us together and she really worked through the process of how to write and got us kind of, practicing writing stories, and it really helped them to see that, how we could honor how their stories could be honored in this way because it gave them the permission to tell whatever version of their story they wanted and how they felt comfortable to do it and creatively, how they could creatively do it as well. And it also gave them the confidence that it was being dealt with sensitively and with care and that, it would be looked after.
Well, it clearly really worked. I mean, one of the things that comes out is that some of the stories do feel quite unresolved at the time that they were writing, as if they hadn't sort of moved on to a place of finding some peace. And you do say in your story that you've moved on, but there are moments, and you describe it as moments that pick at your scar, which I think is an incredibly visual way of depicting that experience for people reading the book. And I wondered about who you thought you were writing the book for. Was it to educate other people about how childlessness might feel, or do you think it was more to kind of support those who were experiencing it themselves?
No, it was a combination of different things. I think what I will say as well, where I am now, I no longer use the term moving on because what I have kind of learned on my journey is that people think go through this grief, you move on, and then you're over it, and then that's it. Final, it's done. And then therefore we shouldn't be sad ever again. And that is just so not true. I felt it was important to reframe moving on to living with the grief because that's exactly what I'm doing. And it changes depending on where I am on each given day. And hence the scar that it picks at. Because the more I work on my grief and the more I'm on my healing journey, the less painful it can feel. Sometimes it still is painful. However, it's not as deep and it's not as long as it used to be. And I think it's really important just to kind of let people know that because it is an important part of our journeys. When it comes to what I was aiming for with the book, I think primarily it was to give myself and my sisters on this journey with me our voices back because it was very clear that we had lost it. And in some respects didn't have it in the first place because we didn't have the language or the courage to speak up about it. So I wanted those voices to be very loudly out there. And I wanted, so the education part was wanting others to know that these stories, that this grief, that this pain is real because it gets so dismissed, hence why we're continuously being fixed. People think that because there are avenues, IVF, adoption, surrogacy, donor eggs, and whatever, I mean, that list is quite endless. That because there are options, there is no reason why we should be here because we can do something about it. And therefore, one, if we choose not to, two, if we choose to stop, because some people do go down that road and do make the choice to stop, then we didn't want it bad enough. So, so that it's all our fault. And I felt it was really important that our grief was seen, was heard, and understood for exactly what it is.
I think it's really interesting talking about being seen and heard because one thing that comes up a number of times in the different stories is that idea of being the odd one out. And I wonder if you could talk a bit about that kind of odd one out feeling, the sense of isolation.
Mm. Do you know, I remember one of the first thoughts and experiences I had when I realized I wasn't going to be a mum was feeling like I don't belong anymore. Um, it's a difficult one because some of the isolation I think we do ourselves because we retreat, and some of the isolation is what other people will do to us because they no longer know what to do. So, you have the experience of us retreating because it's too painful to be there. I know that I remember times, and it was very unexpected for me where I remember a time I went to my goddaughter's play. It was her first school play, and they put all the guests at the back. So I remember I was right at the back of this auditorium, and all the parents were quite at the front. And I'm sitting there watching her, and I was very proud of her moment in this play. And there was a moment then I realized all the parents were all gushing, they're all at the front, all gushing and cooing and, giving all those reactions. And my heart broke. And I just wanted to run. And I couldn't move, I couldn't get out because I was stuck in the back. But I had to sit with this pain of the realization that this was never going to be me. I was never going to have that moment. And I've had similar moments like that, even on a train where I just wanted to run and get off. I've gone to other family events and exactly the same. And it got to a point where I can't do this anymore. So I would stop going. And it does take a lot to stop going because, especially when you're looking at culture, there is an expectation that we will be there, we'll be happy for the people who are having the kids without the knowledge or in the absence of how painful it can be for us. Now, I was able to take myself out of that, so therefore I was removing myself from these situations. I refused to go. I was isolating myself because it was the only way I could protect my heart. And then you've got the other side of the coin where people start going, well, I didn't think you'd want to come because it'll be full of kids, or I didn't know how to ask you, or what, and the list goes on with that. So and I was fortunate that part of it didn't happen to me. However, I know other women who've experienced the exclusion and the isolation because they didn't know how to ask us, but they didn't once ask us, if we wanted to be there and it'd be okay if we don't. So, so there's two sides to it, and it's just very painful, and it can be quite a confusing space to navigate because even if somebody doesn't invite you, you are angry that they haven't invited you. So, and at the same time, you might not want it to go anyway. But it's the point. The point is that no one has asked, so therefore we feel like no one cares, and we're losing our friends, we're losing our place in families. I remember thinking, what do I have to contribute now to both my friends and my family circles? People aren't going to want to hear my opinion because I don't have kids. Again, the list keeps going on, but it's just to highlight the layers of this complexity that we have in navigating our existence when we, realize we're not going to be mums.
One story which really struck out for me from the book was the anonymous story where the woman who tells that story goes to see a chiropodist who asks if she has children. When she says no, actually she doesn't, said, oh, well, it's clearly because you were too busy having a career. And I just wonder, how do we start to change some of that dialogue about it?
I think it's breaking down this stereotype of women, to be a woman, you have to be married and be a mum. And changing the narrative. Patriarchy has a lot to answer for because it tells us that to be a woman, you need to be married and you need to have children. And somehow we've all unconsciously bought into this narrative. So we keep perpetrating this kind of narrative and this stereotype that doesn't actually serve us. Because at the end of the day, we have a choice whether we want to be mums or not. And also, it's not about having a competition. I also want to stress that because I'm not standing here thinking that we should be, non-mums should be in competition with mums and vice versa, because that, again, it's another narrative that I want to tear down and strip away. We're all women on this journey of life who have had different experiences of life, and some of the experiences is that we have children and some is that we don't. And we should be able to come together and celebrate that in all its glory, because there's value to all our journeys and the paths that we've walked along. Now, when it comes to this whole notion of we have to have had a child to be fulfilled, I think, it's breaking down this narrative to understand that actually that's not everybody's path in life. Whether it was by choice or by circumstance, not everybody is going to walk that path of motherhood. And I think we do need to change the language and the thought around it. So, instead of do you have kids, it's why can't we be asking, who are you? What are you about? What life journey, are you on? I feel like, I mean, it's not such an easy question to answer from a point of view of finding all the words that I want to say. However, and also, but it's really about breaking down these stereotypes so that we can get away from the whole narrative of the only way to be seen as a woman and the only way for a woman to have a fulfilled life is to have kids. Therefore, if we didn't, we have chosen this, we have done something to be here. We have, I mean, the career woman narrative is there's so much. I mean, I've heard it myself. And I've had to say to people, is that the only reason why women don't have children then? I've not heard of anyone criticizing a mum for having a career, but yet we get criticized for having a career. And most of us have jobs that we like, that we don't consider as careers. So, again, it really puts us into this box that becomes really, really tricky to navigate when we're in this world and be seen as women who are on a journey that they may not have asked for. I mean, there are parents who are on journeys that they may not have asked for as well. So again, this is sort of taking away the competition element of this. However, women without children were on a journey that we may not have asked for, and to think about the sensitivity around it, oh, do you have children? No. Is that by choice or circumstance? What is the story there? Would you like to talk about it? It's about opening up that conversation from a different perspective so we can have a better understanding of why a woman is in this position, and also ability to hold it with more sensitivity and care than, oh, you must be one of those career women.
Talking about kind of understanding, there's one story again which really stands out, which is Natasha's story. And at the end, she says, and I'll just read this: "Now I've trusted you with my story. Don't feel awkward and please don't try to fix it. Just acknowledge how hard it's been." And I think the idea of trying to offer solutions is something that you touched on earlier, that idea of fixing things. And it takes me back to your own story where you actually decided not to have IVF because of the cost and the low success rate for someone of your age. And I know that there's often a huge pressure on people to have treatment. I mean, how did you negotiate that? Was there a pressure on you?
So I found the pressure came afterwards because I had to justify why I hadn't gone down that road. Because once I started telling people about my story, now I became a public speaker quite early on. It was in 2017 that I started speaking about my experience. And basically, every time I speak about it, with the exception, more probably with the exception of the latter times now that I'm doing this, I always had somebody, did you not try IVF? What about adoption? What about this? What about this? The more I was putting stuff out on social media, I was getting inundated with suggestions on how I could solve my problem. So for me, I just found that it became really hard to be allowed to have made decisions that best suited me, especially when people didn't know why I made those decisions. Now, for me, when I got the unexplained infertility diagnosis, my first thought was I needed to understand why I feel so sad. Mainly because I was quite ambivalent about being a mum, so it didn't make any sense why I was now grieving not the fact that I wouldn't become a mum. And I also then, so I needed to do the work. I just knew that straight away. And then I thought, I'm going to do this year-long program, and then I will look at what I would do afterwards. Once I got towards the end of that program, my marriage was starting to break down. So I wasn't in a position to do anything else. Going through IVF, which is a very emotional journey, would have, and physical, I knew it would have taken its toll on us. We weren't strong enough to go through that. Thinking about adoption, there's no way we could have bring a child who would have needed, extreme care. into a world where we weren't even able to care for ourselves, let alone each other. So those options, I don't know if it would have been different if our marriage was stronger. Probably not. However, under the circumstances, it wasn't a viable option for me to do. So, I knew I needed to look after myself and work through what was happening in my marriage before I could make any other decisions. Um, which, clearly was the right thing to do for us at the time. I, I my marriage did break up, and I can't remember how many years later from then now, but I did leave that marriage in the end. Um, and I knew that it's also a journey I wouldn't have wanted to do on my own. I think my dream was always, because again, this is what I worked out and what I discovered for myself through my grief journey was that my dream was to have it in a marriage, because that's what the dream that was sold to me, and that was the dream that I bought into, and that's the dream I wanted. So anything outside of that wasn't a possibility for me.
You mention really early in your chapter in the book that you had a termination as a young student and in your 20s. And you also talk incredibly honestly about the sense of shame that you felt about that. And you say that one of your fears about writing the book was that you'd actually be judged for that, for what happened when you were much younger. I wonder how you've dealt with that.
So I had two terminations, one in my early 20s, one in my late 20s. And yeah, that really impacted, the shame of that really impacted on my ability to grieve. I remember when a friend said to me I was grieving, because actually the first thing I thought was when I got told I had unexplained infertility was it had to be my fault because of my terminations. And then the second experience I remember having was when a friend did say to me, "You're grieving." I was like, I didn't deserve to grieve because I had those terminations. So, I felt like Jodie Day writes about it in her book as well, in terms of, women who've had terminations feel like they've given up the opportunity to have a child in the past, so therefore they don't deserve to be mums now. And I was carrying that narrative in my head. And I was telling myself that I didn't deserve to grieve, and that was one of the first things when I was feeling like I didn't have the language to describe what was going through. That shame really, really impacted on my ability to be able to even try to tell anyone, because I felt like if I was going to say it to somebody, I would have to also tell them this, which wasn't true, but that's how it felt at the time. And therefore, they would tell me, well, you don't deserve to be a mum. And therefore, if they were going to tell me, everyone else was going to tell me that. So therefore, keep quiet. Don't tell anybody your story. Shut up. Stay in your box. You know, just be sad on your own, which again, it's too painful to do on your own. It really is, a journey that you can't do on your own. You do need to be in connection with other women who are going through the same thing, because we understand, we can support each other, we can give the language, we can give the care, and we can allow the grief, because again, the world outside isn't necessarily allowing the grief. And what I realized when I was writing my story, because at the beginning, one of the things that impacted on me was, or one of the things I thought about was, I can't tell this part of my story because it was too shameful for me. And so a friend said, well, you could leave it out, but I knew if I left it out, it would be a lie, because it was an important part of my story, and it was an important part of why I found it difficult to grieve. So I did some work. I did some one-on-one with Jodie Day at the time, and I went back and looked at my younger self, because all my dating history, my 20s, all impacted on these, and actually even before that, all the narratives I grew up in my childhood, all impacted on the decisions I had made at those times. And she really helped me to see that, and reframe my mistakes, because that's what I was calling at the time, there were simply decisions I made, and decisions to look after my unborn children, because I did that out of love. The situations that I was in wasn't conducive to healthy relationships. I actually wasn't in relationships with either of those men. Um, so I would have been a single mom. I would have done it on my own, and it wasn't what I wanted for them. I wanted better. So, as a result of that work and that realization, I was able to write a letter to my younger self, and I was able to tell her I understood the decisions she made, why she made them. They were made out of love and out of care. And, how much I wished I could have met my children. But I wanted better for them. I wanted more for them, and this wasn't and that wasn't the right time. It really helped me to embrace myself, also with the care and love that I needed at the time that I didn't get, to be able to then embrace that part of my story and tell it in the world because I knew it was a vital part that needed to be shared.
I wondered also whether for you as a Black woman, you felt there were additional issues that came up with all of this around childlessness.
Yeah, it's something I touched on earlier in terms of culture and religion. I really found that culturally, and it's something I know, I mean, again, as a Black woman, I know there are parallels with white women and women from other cultures because I have heard it, I have spoken to women about it. What I found was that culturally, there's this real expectation to bring back to the family, to bring back to the collective. And therefore, if we're not, what are we doing? We don't have any worth, we don't have any value. I've met a number of women from African women who have talked about their husbands leaving because they couldn't have children, because the whole emphasis again is about having children. And you're having children to bring back. You're having children who are going to go off and bring back. And again, as I said, it's all about whatever you're doing, you're increasing your family and you're bringing back to the fold. And it you know I did feel that as a Black woman there was this additional burden to have the children and make my parents grandparents, because that, and also that's the narrative I always heard growing up. It's always when you're going to have children, you'll know when you're a parent. So I never thought it would never happen because no one ever said it might not happen. So it's something for me in my culture, in my household, I felt that was a very, very important narrative. And it's something again with Caribbean, Caribbean parentage, African parentage, Asian parentage. It's something that I've heard a lot in terms of, yeah, bringing back to the family and increasing, our family lineage.
I think it's also why it's so important that you do speak out and that you are seen and that you are visible because it must make such a difference to other women.
Do one of the things that I remember at the beginning of my grief journey, seeing Jodie Day interview Karen Malone, from America. I think she does Not Mums. She's at the Not Mum organization in America. And being a Black woman, I remember going, "Oh my God, she's a Black woman, and she's talking about this." Because again, we have the whole don't share your problems outside of your home, don't talk, don't tell other people about things. So there's a whole again narrative around silencing ourselves. We keep our problems within our families. We don't talk about it. Most of the time, we're not even talk about it within our families. So there's this whole shame, because also don't bring shame on the family. So there's this whole, we hold all the perceived shames, all the perceived mistakes, all the perceived, you shouldn't tell anyone about this stuff internally. And we don't know what to do with that. We don't know where to go with that. We don't know we can talk about it. We don't even know we can get help. And I realized as well, and I've learned it through my own journey of how vital it is for me and for women to see someone like me, someone that looks like them, to talk. I've had numerous occasions when a Black woman or an Asian woman has come to me and said, "I'm messaging you because I know you'll understand." They've gone to events and they've looked through the door and they didn't see one person that looked like them, and they've turned away because they thought, if I enter that room full of white women, no one's going to get me, no one's going to understand, and I'm not going to get the help and support I need. So yeah, it was, as I said, it meant a lot for me to see a Black woman talking about it, and I realized how vital it is for me to be in this space, because it's giving again, not everyone's going to speak about it publicly in the way I am. However, it's giving women like me permission to know they can talk about this and they can get help and they don't have to be on their own.
Yeah, and I think that not being on your own is a really important thing, isn't it? Because it
Yeah.
sounds as if for you, sharing your experiences with other women who'd gone through similar things was a really key part of coming to an understanding of where you wanted to be.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, I think you can get so lost in the grief and we can get so lost in our stories if we even allow ourselves to see our stories that we can't find a way out of it. It feels like this maze of confusion. And until somebody can show you something on the other side, you may not know how you're going to get there. However, you know it's possible. And I think knowing that something's possible really helps you to realize that actually I don't have to stay stuck.
You've got quotes throughout the books dividing the stories, and my favorite is actually yours at the end. And you say, and I'll just read this bit out, not having children has given me the opportunity to take a step back and truly look at myself to discover who I am. I just wondered if you could talk us through that.
Oh, do you know, it's funny hearing that because it's like, what? I wrote that? It's do you know, and it's a question that I got asked recently, really independent of my book, in terms of my journey and what I had been speaking about. And I think what we do is, as I said, we can get stuck in our stories and we can get stuck in where we're at. So when you think of parents, or a lot of parents, that you're bringing up a child, and it's understandable. You get wrapped up in being that person's mum, and that becomes your identity until, as I remember a friend saying to me, until they make you redundant. Um, However, we don't have that. When we don't, when we found that we were on this journey of not becoming mums, I found that it really exposed me to who am I now? Because I'd spent a lot of energy on trying to become a mum. I had got married not long before and then spent the next 3 years and actually a bit beyond that trying to become a mum, that I got to this place of it's not going to happen. And I didn't know who I was. I didn't know who I was going to be. I didn't know who I was meant to be because everything before that moment said, "You're gonna be a mum. You just gotta do it." So I think allowing myself to go on that grief journey allowed me to see me because I had to do. Oh, I feel quite emotional thinking about this. I had to, and I did have to go back. And I'm still doing this. It's not I did it at that time and that was it. It's done. I understand it now. Great. I'm on a healing journey, and I believe until I die, I'll always be on my healing journey. So, and every step, every milestone I get to, every moment I get to that is confronting for me, I feel gives me that opportunity to go back at a deeper point in my life. So I'm always going back to see, well, where did this start? The messages, the feelings, the story of what's contributed to the now. It's always given me that opportunity to go back and see myself at a different point in my life, at a different level in my life, to not only understand what happened. I mean, there's no definitive answers here. It's really about being curious about the past and how it's impacted on my now, on my present. However, it gives me the opportunity to see that version of myself that I may not necessarily have looked at outside of this and see it from a different lens. So, a lens of the sadness, a lens of the hurt, and a lens of the compassion and care that I can give my younger self that I couldn't have given her at the time. And when I can hold that part, that wounded part of myself with that care and compassion, it really helps me to navigate what's happening for me in the present. So I think for me, that really is, it feels so profound that I wrote it, and it's like how many years ago, that for now I'm realizing that's exactly what I've been doing on my journey, is having the gift of going inwards and going backwards to bring my past into my present so I can understand it and see it from a different lens. And as I said, just hold it with that care and compassion and understanding that I could not have done before. It just really helps me to navigate the difficulties, and there are always difficulties. It helps me to navigate it with a lot more ease than I would have done if I was just sitting in my wounds, and anger was the major emotion that I could only deal with.
Yvonne, thank you so much for joining us this evening and for talking about your book and for being a book club guest. And if anyone hasn't read it already, I would recommend that they go out and buy it immediately and read it right away. So thank you so much, Yvonne John, for joining us for our book club.